The Galactic Empire launched a cleansing fleet at Earth. Something came back instead. The chamber smelled of recycled air and something else underneath it. Something burnt. HFY set 2 gray folders on the table in front of her, and did not open them. She had carried them for 14 months. Today she would not need to. Across the chamber, Hegemon Select Corvin Tal rose from the central dais. He moved the way large predators move when they want you to see how unhurried they are. His webbed fingers rested on the podium edge, each knuckle catching the chamber light. The 7th Purification Armada launched 11 months ago, Tal said. 312 vessels. The largest single military action this council has authorized in 2 centuries. He let the number sit in the room. It entered human-claimed space on the 14th of March. It did not return. Council Elder Ashen Teal, ancient and gray-skinned, shifted in her seat at the head of the Ark. The undrilled Compact's delegate leaned toward her aide and whispered something nobody else could hear. Kes kept her hands flat on the table, 2 sealed folders, untouched, in front of her. She watched Tal the way a woman watches whether she has already checked the forecast for. 312 ships, Tal repeated, and not one of them came home. Either humanity lacked the strength to defend its colonies from a hegemony fleet, or humanity possessed the strength to destroy one. Both conclusions point to the same outcome. He spread his hands, almost gentle. Humanity's application for council membership should close, permanently. He smiled, faint and certain. Perhaps, in some centuries, humanity will mature into what the council requires. The chamber held its breath. 3 blocks of delegates turned, almost as one body, toward the small woman with the 2 closed folders. Kes did not move. Behind her composure, something was already finished. The argument Tal had just made, the trap he believed he was closing, had been built on a single missing fact. He did not know it was missing. That was the whole of it. 14 months ago, a relay buoy on the edge of Terran space had logged a pattern of hegemony fleet movement that did not match any training exercise on record. 1 month after that log was filed, the 7th Armada began its slow build toward launch. 14 months before launch, 1 month before they started, nobody in this chamber knew that timeline existed. Tal had built his entire case on the assumption that humanity learned of the Armada when it arrived. He was wrong by 13 months, and he did not know it. Council Elder, Tal said, turning back to Teal, I would ask the chamber to vote on closure before further session time is. The Terran delegate has not yet responded, Teal said. Her voice was dry, unhurried, the voice of someone who had sat through 400 years of chamber sessions and had learned that the ones that mattered rarely announced themselves. Captain Arawai, do you wish to respond to Hegemon Select Tal's request? Kes Arawai stood. She did not reach for either folder. Yes, she said, I do. The word landed in the chamber like a small stone dropped into very still water. Tal's expression did not change, but his fingers, resting on the podium edge, went still in a way they had not been still a moment before. Hegemon Select Tal's numbers are correct, Kes said. Her voice was level, unhurried, pitched to carry without effort. 312 vessels. The 7th Purification Armada. Launch date the 14th of March, 11 months ago. I have no corrections to make to any of those figures. A ripple of confusion moved through the chamber. The Sarin Reach delegate frowned, glancing between Kes and the data display above the dais. I would like to correct one detail, however. Kes paused, just long enough for the room to lean toward her without knowing it was leaning. The fleet did not fail to return. She let that sit for exactly as long as Tal had let his own numbers sit. It was returned. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a room trying, all at once, to figure out which of its assumptions had just become wrong. Tal's hands had not moved from the podium, but something behind his eyes had a small recalibration, the kind a person does when a familiar door does not open the way it always has. I'm afraid I don't follow the distinction, Captain, Tal said. His voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. A fleet that does not return has, by definition, failed to return. There is no other category. There is one other category, Kes said. I can show the council exactly where it is if that would help. She reached toward the small console set into the table in front of her. Not toward the folders, just past them, and tapped twice. Above the central dais, a star map bloomed into view. A single moon, marked in soft amber, orbited a gas giant on the edge of a system most of the chamber would recognize as hegemony territory. Around the moon, a cluster of 312 small points sat motionless, arranged in a pattern too orderly to be drift. It is currently parked in a stable orbit, Kess said, above Kelsara's second moon. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the deliberation chamber said anything at all. Then the undrilled Compact's delegate, the one who had been whispering to her aide, said something out loud instead, too quiet for the recorders, but Kess saw the shape of it on her lips. A single word repeated. Their moon. Tal's fingers tightened once around the podium edge, and then relaxed, deliberately, as though he had noticed himself and corrected it. That is hegemony territory, he said. If 300 Terran vessels are parked above a hegemony world without. They're not Terran vessels, Kess said. They're yours. All 312 of them, crew aboard. No significant damage to hull integrity. She paused. No casualties reported on Kelsara either in case that question was forming. Council Elder Teal raised one gray hand, and the chamber's low murmur quieted, though it did not entirely stop. Captain HFY, Teal said, and for the first time there was something other than dry patience in the old Vrothai's voice, something closer to genuine curiosity. Are you telling this council that the 7th Purification Armada is intact, crewed, and currently in your custody? I'm telling the council, Kess said, that it was never in our custody at all. We returned it. We filed the transfer notification with Council Traffic Control on the 19th of March, 5 days after the Armada entered human space. The reference number is in the second folder, if the council would like to verify it independently before I continue. She did not push the folder forward. She let it sit, sealed, exactly where it had been since she walked in. Tal's gaze dropped to the folder for half a second, then back up to Kess. His expression had not cracked, but his hands, for the first time since the session began, moved off the podium entirely and settled into his lap. 5 days, Tal said slowly. You are telling this council that within 5 days of the 7th Armada's arrival, humanity had not only repelled the largest fleet this council has authorized in 2 centuries, but had already filed paperwork. 11 months ago, yes, Kess said. 11 months is also how long the council has been operating under the assumption that the Armada was lost. She tilted her head slightly. I'd like to walk the chamber through how that gap happened, with the council's permission. Teal looked at Tal. Tal said nothing. The chamber grants permission, Teal said. Thank you, Kess said. She did not sit back down. It begins 14 months before the Armada launched. 1 month before hegemony, planning for the 7th Armada began it all. Somewhere in the 3rd tier of delegate podiums, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward. 14 months ago, Kess said, a Terran relay buoy near the edge of our surveyed space logged an unscheduled hegemony fleet movement pattern. At the time, we didn't know what it meant. We logged it anyway. That's what relay buoys do. She let the word relay sit in the air for a moment, unremarked, the way you set down a tool you intend to pick up again later. 1 month after that log entry, Kess continued, hegemony fleet planning for what would become the 7th Purification Armada began. We didn't know that either, not specifically. What we knew was that the pattern from our buoy log didn't match anything in our threat models. So we kept watching it. For 13 months, Tal said. It wasn't quite a question. For 13 months, Kess agreed, during which a great many things happened that individually looked like nothing at all. What I wish you'd heard that day, Kess said, is that you'll want to hear all of it. There's more. Stay with me. She let the line settle, then continued. Most of those 13 months looked like routine survey work, buoy placements, infrastructure registrations, the kind of paperwork that crosses this council's desk by the thousand and gets stamped without a second look. Paperwork, Tal repeated. The word came out flatter than before. Over those 14 months, Kess said, The Terran Survey and Infrastructure Corps registered 4,400 autonomous relay platforms across our outer colony systems, filed under Standard Survey Article 9, Subsection 3, Civilian Infrastructure, Non-Weapons Classification. She paused. Registered with this council's own Infrastructure Bureau, approved as routine. Nobody flagged them. The Sarin Reach delegate had gone very still. 4,400 relay buoys, Tal said. That is an unusually large survey deployment. It is, Kess agreed, though I should clarify what these particular buoys can do beyond relaying signals. She kept her hands flat on the table. Each platform, in addition to its civilian function, is capable of reducing a Kel-Sora-class capital ship to ionized debris in approximately 1.8 seconds. Nobody in the chamber spoke. Somewhere above the dais, the star map still showed the amber moon, the 312 motionless points around it. Kess thought, distantly, that the points had not looked like a fleet at rest until just now. They had looked like a fleet that had been told to sit still. When the 7th Armada arrived at the Kestrel outer marker, Kess said, 11 months ago, on the 14th of March, they found the colony systems already evacuated, and they found their own fleet sitting inside a sphere. 4,400 platforms, evenly spaced, all around them. Tal's webbed fingers, still in his lap, curled once and went flat again. They received one transmission, Kess said. I can play the recording for the council if anyone would like to hear it, or I can simply tell you what it said. She paused, and for the first time something in her voice was almost gentle. It said, "You may leave the same way you arrived. We recommend you do so now." The Undrill Compact's delegate had stopped pretending to write notes. Her aide had stopped pretending too. The Armada left, Kess said. In formation, 312 ships unharassed, unboarded. The platforms tracked them to the edge of human-surveyed space and then stood down. She looked briefly toward the second folder on the table, still sealed. A single Terran vessel escorted them the rest of the way, the ISV Meridian, a survey frigate, crew of 43. 43, Tal said. 43, Kess confirmed. Unarmed, by the way. The Meridian doesn't carry weapons. It's a survey ship. Its captain filed a standard courtesy transit notification with this station's traffic control on departure, the same as any vessel passing through a system it doesn't intend to stop in. She let that sit. We escorted the largest fleet this council has ever authorized home with an unarmed survey ship, and then we filled out a form about it. Council Elder Teal had not spoken in some time. When she did, her voice had lost its dry patience entirely. Captain HFY, you are telling this chamber that humanity surrounded a 312-ship armada with weapons disguised as civilian infrastructure, registered through this council's own bureau, without a single member state noticing. I'm telling the chamber, Kess said, that we registered exactly what they were, relay platforms, civilian classification. The capability wasn't hidden, it was filed. She tilted her head slightly. Nobody asked what a relay platform could do beyond relay. That wasn't our omission, Council Elder. That was an assumption built into the form. A new voice cut through the murmur, the Sarin Reach delegate on his feet now, for the first time in the session. He was a narrow, gray-skinned man who had not said a word in 2 hours. Council Elder, if the registrations are genuine and dated as the captain describes, then this council approved, 14 months ago, the deployment of a weapons network capable of destroying a hegemony armada, and called it a survey grid. That is correct, Kess said. Then the council itself, the Sarin Reach delegate said slowly, signed off on its own checkmate before the game began. It was the first time anyone besides Kess or Tal had spoken a full sentence, and the chamber turned toward him as though he'd produced something physical from his coat. He sat back down, looking faintly surprised at himself. Tal's hands came up from his lap slowly and folded on the podium in front of him, the gesture of a man trying to look composed while buying himself a second to think. Captain HFY, he said, and his voice had lost its earlier patience, replaced by something more careful. You said the Armada was not destroyed, that you chose not to. I did say that. 312 ships, Tal said, surrounded, disarmed of any meaningful response. You're telling this council you held that position and released them. I'm telling the council we could have ended it in about 11 minutes, Kess said. We chose instead to send it home. The chamber did not erupt. It did the opposite. It went so quiet that the faint hum of the chamber's environmental systems became audible, a low background note that nobody had noticed until the voices stopped. Kess let 3 full seconds pass. I want to be precise, she said, because precision matters to this council, and because the council has spent 2 hours this session discussing precision as it relates to humanity's fitness for membership. She did not raise her voice. Humanity did not destroy the Seventh Armada. We chose not to. We filed the appropriate paperwork, and we have been waiting for this hearing for 14 months. A small pause. We were ready before the fleet launched. Something shifted in the third tier. One of the 3 independent system observers, a small, quill-feathered delegate from a system Kess didn't recognize by sight, had stood up without seeming to notice he'd done it. He sat back down a moment later, slowly, the way a person sits down after realizing they stood for no reason they could explain. Tal's composure had not broken, but it had gone somewhere else, inward behind his eyes, where Kess had seen it go the moment she said Kel Sara's second moon. He was no longer arguing a position. He was recalculating one. 14 months, Tal said, and for the first time, it sounded less like a statement and more like a man checking a number against something in his own memory, hoping it would come out different the second time. 14 months, Kess said. 1 month before hegemony, planning for the Seventh Armada began at all. The amber moon hung above the dais, 312 points motionless around it, and for a long moment nobody in the deliberation chamber said anything at all, not because there was nothing left to say, but because every delegate in the room was running the same calculation, and none of them were finishing it at the same speed. Council Elder Teal finally broke the silence. Her voice, when it came, had the careful flatness of someone choosing each word with both hands. Hegemon-select Tal, do you have a response to the captain's account? Tal did not answer immediately. His gaze moved briefly to the 2 sealed folders still sitting untouched in front of Kess HFY, folders that, the chamber was beginning to understand, might never need to be opened at all, and that fact was somehow worse than anything they could contain. I would request, Tal said slowly, a recess. The chamber will not recess, Council Elder Teal said. She said it before Tal had finished straightening from his half-rise, and the speed of it landed like a second reversal in the same hour. The old Vrothai's gray eyes had not left Kess HFY's folders since the word 14 had entered the record. This session has heard a formal request to close a membership application, Teal said, on grounds this council itself approved 14 months ago without knowing what it was approving. A recess does not change what is already in the record. Sit down, Hegemon-select, Tal said. It was a small thing, a body lowering itself into a chair, but every delegate in the chamber watched it happen, and Kess understood why. For 2 hours, Tal had stood when he chose to stand and sat when he chose to sit, and the room had read each movement as a decision. This was the first movement that wasn't. Teal had told him to sit, and he had. Kess remained standing. She had not been told to do anything. Captain HFY, Teal said, turning back to her. You said the platform stood down at the edge of human-surveyed space. I want to understand the mechanism of that. 4,400 weapons platforms do not simply switch off. They didn't switch off, Kess said. They returned to standard relay function. The capability is dormant by default. It activates only on a specific authorization sequence, time-limited, logged at every step. She paused. After the Armada crossed the boundary, the authorization expired. The platforms went back to relaying signals. Most of them have been doing exactly that uninterrupted for the past 11 months. Weather data, navigation pings, the ordinary business of a survey grid. They've been sitting there, the Sarin Reach delegate said quietly, almost to himself, doing weather reports. Most of them, yes, Kess said. She reached for the small console again, the same 2 taps as before, and the star map above the dais shifted. The amber moon and its motionless fleet faded. In its place, a wider view, The human outer colonies, marked in pale blue, and around them, scattered like a net someone had dropped and not yet picked up, 4,400 tiny points of light. Most of them glowed a soft, steady green. "This is the current state of the grid," Cass said, "as of this morning." For a moment, nobody spoke. The points covered a volume of space larger than the hegemony's own core systems. They had been there, doing nothing, asking nothing. The entire time anyone in this chamber had been alive to notice or not notice them. "I'd like to return to something the Hegemon Select said earlier," Kess continued, and her tone did not change, did not sharpen. If anything, it softened, the way a teacher's voice softens right before the part of the lesson that matters most. He said that a species unable to defend its outer territories fails this council's viability standard, and that a species capable of destroying a hegemony armada is, by definition, a hazard. She looked at Tal directly for the first time in several minutes. "I'd like to know which of those the Hegemon Select believes describes humanity now." Tal did not answer right away. His hands, folded on the podium, had not moved, but something in his face had the ceremonial scar along his jaw, the mark of 8 conquest campaigns, sat differently than it had 2 hours ago. It was the same scar. The face around it had changed. "Neither," Tal said finally. The word came out quieter than anything he'd said all session. "Could the Hegemon Select clarify?" Teal asked. It was not a kindness. Kess understood that immediately. The council elder was not giving Tal an opening. She was making him say it, in full, for the record. "A species that detects an existential threat 14 months before its origin civilization begins planning it," Tal said slowly. "That builds a response sufficient to neutralize that threat without engaging it, that files every step of that response through legitimate channels, that releases an enemy fleet intact rather than destroying it, and that has been waiting, for 11 months, for the opportunity to demonstrate this in the proper forum." He stopped. "Is not a species that failed to defend itself," Kess said quietly, finishing it for him, not unkindly, "and is not a species that poses an uncontrolled hazard." "No," Tal said. "Then what is it?" Teal asked. The chamber waited. Kess waited too. This was not her question to answer. Tal looked for a long moment at the star map, the wide net of pale green points, the small blue worlds they surrounded, the same worlds he had walked into this chamber 2 hours ago, intending to declare unfit to exist alongside his own. "It is a species," Tal said, "that I do not understand as well as I believed I did." It was, Kess thought, the most honest sentence anyone had spoken in this chamber all day, possibly the most honest sentence Corvin Tal had spoken in his life, in front of an audience on the record, and it had cost him nothing he could see how to get back. The quill-feathered observer in the 3rd tier had taken out a data slate and was writing something. So was the undrill compact's aide. So Kess noticed were 2 of the hegemony's own attaches, seated behind Tal, writing quickly. The way people write when they have realized the meeting they are in will be quoted for a very long time, and they want their version of events to exist in the record before anyone else's does. Kess sat back down. It was, in its way, the most ordinary thing she had done all session. She reached for the small carafe of water that had been sitting at the edge of the table since before the session began, poured a half cup, and did not drink it, just held it, the way a person holds something to have something to hold. Around the chamber, the recalculation continued, not in words, but in the small adjustments of posture, the shift of attention, the particular quality of attention a room gives something it has decided, collectively and without announcement, has become important. "Council Elder," said a new voice. It was the Undrill Compact's senior delegate, the one who had whispered their moon under her breath 2 hours ago. She was on her feet now, and her voice, when it came, carried none of the nervous energy it had earlier. It was flat, careful, the voice of someone who had spent the last 10 minutes deciding exactly what she was going to say and in what order. "The Undrill Compact wishes to enter a motion," she said, "regarding the status of the Terran membership application currently before this council." Teal inclined her head. "The chamber will hear it." "The compact moves," the delegate said, "that the application be reclassified. She paused, and for the first time Kess saw her glance not at Tal, not at Teal, but at Kess herself directly before continuing, not as an application for membership, as a notification of status already held. The phrase landed in the chamber and sat there, and Kess understood in the half-second before anyone reacted that this was the moment the title of this entire hearing had been quietly waiting for, the moment the hegemony had walked in to prevent, and had instead, through 2 hours of its own argument, made inevitable. Tal's head came up. "That motion," he said, and his voice had found something of its old weight again, though it was aimed somewhere different now, "would require this council to acknowledge that a species we have been evaluating for membership has, for some unstated period, already met every standard by which membership is measured, and simply had not been told." "Yes," the undrilled delegate said. "For how long?" Tal asked, and Kess understood that the question was not really for the compact's delegate. It was for Kess. It was, perhaps, the only question Tal had left that he genuinely did not know the answer to. Kess set down the cup of water she had not drunk. "I don't know," she said. "That's not a figure I have. I imagine it's one. This council will need to decide for itself." It was, she thought, the first time all session that she had said something true and had no number to attach to it, and judging by the silence that followed, it landed harder than any of the numbers had. Teal's gaze moved slowly around the chamber, across the 3 blocks now murmuring among themselves, across Tal, still seated, across the wide green net of lights still glowing above the dais, and settled, finally, on Kess. "Captain HFY," she said, "before this council proceeds to a vote on the compact's motion, the chair would ask one further question, off the formal record if the captain prefers." "I have no objection to the record," Kess said. Teal nodded once. "Why did humanity wait 14 months of preparation? 11 months since the Armada departed. The capability to demonstrate all of this existed from the day the platforms went active. Why wait for this hearing, for the hegemony to bring its own request for expulsion, to reveal any of it?" It was, Kess thought, the only question in 2 hours that had actually surprised her. Behind her, unopened, the 2 gray folders sat exactly where they had sat since she walked in. She did not look at them. She did not need to. Because this was the only hearing, Kess said, where the council would be listening to every word. Kess let the silence after her own words settle before she spoke again. "If the council wishes to ask why now and not 11 months ago," she said, "the honest answer is that 11 months ago, nobody had asked us anything. We had information that mattered. We had nowhere to put it that anyone would read." She paused. "This council scheduled a hearing to discuss whether humanity should exist as a member. That's a room where people listen." Teal studied her for a long moment, and if the hegemony had not requested this hearing, then the information would have waited for the next one, Kess said. "It wasn't going anywhere. Neither were we." Tal had not spoken. He sat with his hands folded, the ceremonial scar along his jaw catching the chamber light at an angle that made it look, for the first time, less like a mark of conquest and more like an old wound that had simply never been looked at properly. "The undrilled compact's motion stands before the chamber," Teal said. "Reclassification of the Terran application from candidate status to existing status notification. Hegemon-select Tal. Does the hegemony wish to speak against the motion?" Tal was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. "No," he said. That was all. One word, and the chamber absorbed it the way still water absorbs a stone dropped from a great height, not a splash, but a slow circle of disturbance spreading outward until it touched every edge of the room. "The Sauron reached seconds the motion," the narrow gray delegate said, rising again. "The independent system's cosign," said the quill-feathered observer, not rising this time, simply speaking from where he sat, his data slate held loosely in one hand as though he had stopped needing to write things down. "Then the motion carries," Teal said. "The chamber will record that the application before it this session is withdrawn, not denied, not approved, but withdrawn as moot, on the grounds that the status it sought has already existed for a period this council did not previously recognize." She looked at Kess. "Captain HFY, is there anything further the Terran delegation wishes to enter into the record?" Kess reached into her jacket. It was the same motion she had made hours ago, when she'd placed the first data chip on the table, except this time, the chamber watched every centimeter of it, the way a room watches a hand it has learned, slowly and at great cost, to take seriously. The chip she set down now was a different one, unmarked gray composite, thumb-worn smooth along one edge from being carried, turned over, carried again. "This is the flight log of the ISV Meridian," Kess said. 14 months of continuous sensor recording, every relay buoy ping, every authorization sequence, logged and time-stamped, the full transit of the 7th Armada, from the moment it crossed into human space to the moment the Meridian watched it cross back out. She set it down at the center of the table, not toward Tal, not toward Teal, at the exact geometric center of the chamber's lowest tier, equidistant from every delegation present. "Everything I've described this session is in here, verifiable, unedited. Nobody moved to take it. The Council can keep that," Kess said, "for your records." She did not push it further. She did not need to. It sat there, small and gray and unremarkable, in the center of a room built to make people feel small. And for the first time in 2 hours, the room's architecture seemed to be working against the people who had built it, because the chip looked, against the vast curved floor and the 40-meter ceiling, like the only thing in the chamber that had not been designed to impress anyone. Tal looked at it. He did not reach for it either. "Hegemon Select," Teal said, and her voice had gone gentle in a way Kess hadn't heard from her before, not pity exactly. Something closer to the courtesy one old institution extends to another, when both have just learned something about themselves. "Does the hegemony have anything further?" Tal stood. It took him a moment, not from any physical difficulty, but the way a person stands when they are not yet sure what their body intends to do once it's upright. "No," he said again. He did not leave immediately. He stood for a moment, looking at the star map still glowing faintly above the dais, the wide net of pale green lights, dimmer now as the display began its automatic fade, and then, without any further words, gathered the small stack of notes he had brought with him, 2 hours and a lifetime ago, when he had believed this session would end with humanity's application closed forever. He walked out first. Nobody stopped him. Nobody needed to. Kess remained standing a moment longer. Around her, the chamber was already changing shape, not physically, but in the way a room changes when the thing it was built to argue about has stopped being arguable. Delegates who had spent 2 hours sitting rigidly upright were leaning back, or leaning toward each other, the small unconscious adjustments of bodies that had been braced for something and were now, slowly, unbracing. She reached for the 2 gray folders. For one single second that nobody in the chamber would later be entirely certain they had seen, her fingers rested on the seal of the first folder. 14 months of preparation, contingencies, responses, everything humanity had built in case this hearing had gone differently. She did not open it. She picked up both folders, sealed, exactly as she had carried them in, and tucked them under one arm. "Council Elder," Kess said. Teal inclined her head. "Thank you for hearing the delegation." It was, Kess thought, the only sentence all session that had nothing underneath it. No reversal, no reveal, just the plain shape of the words themselves, and perhaps that was its own kind of statement, in a room that had just spent 2 hours learning what humanity meant when it said things plainly. She turned and walked toward the chamber's wide doors, her footsteps unhurried, the same pace she had used walking in. Behind her, the data chip sat alone at the center of the lowest tier, small and gray and thumb-worn, the only object left on the vast curved floor. The doors opened ahead of her without sound. Kess HFY walked out of the deliberation chamber at Ver Station, 2 unopened folders under her arm, and did not look back at the chip she had left behind, because she had already said everything it contained, and the only thing left for it to do now was sit there, in the center of the room, for as long as the Council kept records. Behind her, the chamber held its silence a moment longer. Then, slowly, the murmur of 200 delegates beginning all at once to talk among themselves filled the space where the argument used to be, and on the lowest tier, untouched, the small gray chip caught the last fading light of the star map as it dimmed to nothing above an empty dais.